Welcome to Around the Product Development, our weekly series where we deep dive into the world of digital product creation. And this is all just in 25 minutes. Here we explore every stage from ideation to conversion and monetization, providing you with actionable insights and practical knowledge. Each week, we bring you fresh perspectives from industry experts, giving you the opportunity to learn directly from their hands-on experience. All this is possible thanks to our Agile Product Builders community, which is a Slack community powered by Boldare, digital product creators and consultants. And today, we're tackling a critical and I believe very time-sensitive topic, which is how to make your app EAA compliant. And this must be done, I believe, before June 2025, which is just around the corner. And with this European Accessibility Act, which EAA stands for, deadline fast approaching, many companies are at risk of legal consequences, fines, and reputational damage. But getting compliant doesn't have to break your workflow or your product roadmap. And today, joining us, Daniel Majewski, co-founder and head of management consulting at Exerizon, who will walk us through a practical, no-fluff guide to making your digital products accessible. Whether you're software as a service, e-commerce, banking, or public services, this episode, I believe, is packed with a lot of tips you can implement today to stay ahead of the curve. Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
How are you today?
Pretty good, and thanks for having me. We have a really interesting subject for a discussion, and I'm sure that will be action-packed.
Oh, definitely. But before we dive in, I would love to start with why accessibility truly matters in digital product development. Since I believe more than 1 million people, which makes 1 in 4 adults in EU alone, is living with some kind form of disability. And for them, accessible digital products are not just a luxury, they're essential things. And the European Accessibility Act coming into effect in June will make accessibility a legal obligation for many industries. But compliance aside, accessibility, I believe, should always be a core part of building inclusive user-centered products. And because good design is all about accessible design, right? And let's dive into the questions. So maybe start with the basics. What exactly is the European Accessibility Act, and why should product teams start taking it seriously now?
Yeah, so I believe that many of you and people on the call actually always thought and had in mind accessibility. But the case is that really often it was like an afterthought. So we are creating the product, we are thinking about our clients, product and services, and then at the very end, we are asking poor designer or front-end developer to adjust the product also to keep in mind the accessibility standards. But what European Union is trying to do, what European Commission is trying to do, to actually make sure that this process is harmonized and aligned across different industries, across different markets. Because after all, European Union was created to make sure that we have a really standardized approach across entire European Union. That when you are launching a new product or service, you don't really need to think 27 times about different regulations, but you have one standardized approach. And this is the goal of the regulation. So there are many people who care about accessibility, but Germany, Spain, and other markets had different approach about this. So the goal of this regulation is to make sure that it will be accessible not only for our end customers, but also accessible for product developers and product designers, product managers who are actually creating new services. And why it's important? Why is it important now? Because as you rightly said, the deadlines are approaching really, really fast. The first one which you mentioned is June 2025. So no, it's not a mistake. We are literally discussing this June. It's really important because starting from this date, all new product and services should be actually aligned with this regulation. So if you're launching something like in the next 2 months, or you're launching something after the holiday break, already you need to be fully compliant. And it's a huge challenge. We will discuss later in details what does it mean to be fully compliant and whether you need to be compliant or not. But it's definitely that it should be on your agenda starting not only from now, but I hopefully that many of you already thought about this before. So this is one deadline. And the second deadline that we need to keep in mind, because right now what I described are new product and services, but it doesn't mean that you can simply like not touch all product and services at all. Actually, there's a second deadline and until 2030. So this deadline seems to be quite far away. You need to also adjust all existing products and services. So 2030 deadline, it sounds really far in the future because it is. But if we are discussing, and in many cases, this regulation is not only affecting, let's say, startups and SaaS providers, but also incumbent players in telco, energy, and so on, they really often they have even 10 years roadmaps for migration and refactoring of different products and services. So they need to keep in mind actually how to manage this challenge, not only for new products and services, but also how we can slowly make sure that all our portfolio of digital fingerprints and digital touch points is covered and compliant with this regulation.
Yeah, you touched actually a couple of industries. Are they all legally required to comply with the EAA by June? Or there are some, that are excluded? How does the landscape look like here?
Yeah. So exemptions and exclusions are always complicated matter because, of course, when we discuss that something is excluded, normally there are like a 5 asterisk when you actually can use this exclusion. But maybe it would be easier if we first describe who is covered, and then we can discuss basically what does it mean for other companies. So by definition, if you are working in any kind of consumer electronics or communication companies, if you are working for financial services, any kind of transport, so air, bus, rail, it doesn't matter, any kind of transport, e-commerce, publishing, so even content and emergency services, energy, all of these touch points need to be covered by the European Accessibility Act. And what does it mean? Because all seems like quite vague, but to simplify the matter and to have a reference point, if something is facing the end customer, so we are discussing mainly B2C channel, it needs to be aligned with the definition. And it's actually quite interesting because obviously because our audience and this and your webinar and your podcast, we are thinking mainly about digital services, but actually this regulation is touching also all other channels, also physical channels. So if you are working for financial services industry and you have payment terminals or ATMs, they also need to be aligned to this regulation. So it's not only about web and mobile. Moreover, we need to also cover other digital channels. So web and mobile are quite obvious, and even European Commission released special appendix describing what specific requirements do we have for this channel. But if you're sending an email with PDF, both either email and PDF need to be compliant and need to be accessible. Of course, devil is in the details. I'm oversimplifying right now, and I understand that. But just to be for our colleagues on the call to understand what's basically covered. So once again, any kind of financial sector, transport, e-commerce, publishing, content, consumer electronics, everything is covered by this. But actually, there are a few, I would say, traps, because when I said e-commerce, and most of actually people know that we're discussing this regulation, when we are discussing e-commerce, they only in their mind narrow down this to e-commerce platforms or marketplaces. But actually, regulator, what has in mind is actually all of e-commerce services, including any online sale of product or service. So even if you're not e-commerce yourself, but you're selling a service through mobile or through web channel, you're actually covered also by this regulation. So as you are seeing, it's quite complex to get and to grasp entire landscape of covered industries. And it's actually by definition, because regulator is hoping that most of touch points that people who actually need to leverage these accessibility features will be covered in their daily lives to make sure that they can fully leverage your product and services in their journeys. Regarding the exemptions, here, there are a few different ones, but probably the most important one for many of you who are just starting your business is that micro enterprises, in line with EU definitions, so companies with less than 10 employees and less than 2 million euro turnover, they can be exempted from this regulation. You don't need to then create like a full documentation, because we'll discuss about this burden in a second, but there's a lot of things to do, not only from the point of view of how you are designing your product or service, but actually what your documentation is showing about these services. So if you are a micro enterprise, you can be exempted, but actually it's quite complex because not in every country there is exactly the same principle whether you can be exempted or not and from what. So if you need to basically, depending on when you are based, you need to investigate this, whether you can be exempted or not, but it's something that you can think if you're just starting your business. But also, I believe that most of us, when we're creating a new business, we are not hoping that we will basically stay in a really small scale. So even it's good to design already having in mind our, let's say, target audience and target business side, because you can have right now 1 million euro turnover and 5 employees, but in 5 months it can completely change and immediately we will answer in this regulation. So it's a good actually idea to plan ahead, to think ahead about this and make sure that you are compliant.
Yeah, and what we just mentioned before, building an inclusive user-centered product is the goal itself, because one more time, a good design is an accessible design, right? So as you said, like companies change, evolve, but still in terms of keeping the pace of what's going on with the market right now, how products are created right now, I believe this inclusivity is kind of a cornerstone here. And
yeah, definitely.
you mentioned, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe that also there is a pressure to move how designers are approaching this challenge, how product owners are approaching this channel. As I said at the very beginning, it's not that people right now are forgetting that your channels need to be accessible, but rather that from the very beginning, when you're creating the vision for your product, you need to basically design it for all. So not that you are designing your product basically for your core audience or for people without disabilities, and then you are thinking, okay, what we can do, but moving this process at the very beginning of your product creation journey and thinking ahead can really benefit all users, not only those with disabilities, but basically can change your product philosophy, how you are approaching this channel. Because even looking at as we are attacked from every angle about AI and all the models, is the fact that basically it's not only about the interface that we are touching, but also voice control and so on. And all of these things need to be also aligned with this regulation. So it's really hard to imagine a new product and service which will be released soon without keeping in mind this regulation. This is why it's not only about whether you have to do it or not, because you have, but also about basically changing how you are approaching this issue.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, the deadline for, let's say, starting point for the new digital products, or not only digital products as a whole, is June this year. And the businesses who already have some, they need to adapt to those regulations by 2030. I would love to ask you, how should product teams actually, assess the current platforms? What are the main steps as they can actually take today to move forward into EAA compliance without, derailing their existing roadmap or cutting on features or cutting on quality they provide right now?
Yeah. So the starting point, without doubt, is basically you need to understand whether you are covered or not. As we described at the very beginning, actually the scope of this regulation is really, really wide. So there is a huge chance that if you're selling anything online, you are already covered, at least some of your journeys. So you need to basically understand whether it's an issue for you or not. And I believe that unfortunately or not, but for most of us who are creating new products and services, it will be a challenge that you need to face. And then if you basically understand that it's also applying to you, you need to start with understanding where are you from the point of view of creating new products or services and actually your existing portfolio. And here I would say there is like a trap number 2, because imagine that you have existing mobile app and you're adding a new feature to the app. So is it a new product or service and you need to actually be compliant from June? Or whether you can say that, okay, but I'm just changing existing product or service, so it's basically something that should be ready by the 2030 from the point of view of implementation. And here the answer is really simple. The answer is it depends. So it's so you cannot basically define like to have like one golden rule that you know whether you can distinguish easily whether regulation would basically count this or perceive this as a new product service or not. You need to basically deep dive and better understand. So after step number 1, basically confirming that you are covered by regulation, you need to look at your portfolio both with existing and upcoming products and services, and better understand what's your deadline. Because for some of those products and services, the deadline will be actually this year in 2 months. For other services, it will be actually 2030. And with this picture, you need to start leveraging what's already available in the market, and we need to start auditing of your both current product that you're building and existing portfolio. And here is it's a good basically approach to both leverage automatic tools that can help you, for example, to assess from automatic perspective whether you are feasible or not to implement those changes. But because there are many things that are subjective in this regulation, especially about the accessibility from the point of view not only of the standards, but whether it is given service or product is meeting those standards, it's a really strong recommendation to also discuss it with expert or think about this in manual way. So don't only rely on automatic tools. They are definitely not enough to make sure that you are compliant with regulation, but you need to combine this automatic approach with more expert approach to balance these two perspectives. Then if you have finally a good understanding what are your potential gaps, yes, because you have conducted the audit, you need to think how you will face those issues. And regarding new product or services, I believe it will be really high priority for most of our colleagues on the call to make sure that you will be ready, because you don't want to delay your product because you have not thought about the accessibility before. But you also need to have a quite comprehensive roadmap for for existing product and services. So what you will do with them, and it's really good then to have a discussion depending on your company size with your IT colleagues, with your corporate architects. What should be the roadmap to actually update those front ends? And this will give you a picture not only from the point of view of what you need to do, but actually what are the next steps and how you can plan and approach this important issue. And finally, last but not least, you need to move into implementation and validation of your approach. Here there can be a tricky thing, because you know what's your gap to fulfill that you need to fulfill to make sure that you are compliant. Then you are moving actually to implementation of those things, but then it's really often you can think that you're compliant, but once again, because many things are subjective, it's good to once again verify and test to make sure that you're actually answering the needs of the regulation. So long story short, it's quite complex product, but step number 1, you need to verify whether you're covered or not. Step number 2, you need to think actually what is your gap, so you need to conduct audit. Step number 3, depending on your gaps, you need to approach this challenge and make sure that you have a plan how to do it. And last but not least, implement and test this approach.
I got you. Or you can hire an expert, and there is a service I believe you and Boldare provide together, right? Which is accessibility as a service. And then basically all the steps you mentioned are covered by the experts that very thoroughly analyze and stay up to date with current EU regulations and help you plan all the changes on the way, then support you with the implementation, which means there is no, let's say, decrease of your team's capacity, and then test, validate, verify everything once again, creating some compliance report on the end and support you within the auditing process, right?
Yes, you're totally correct, because really often our clients are thinking, should we do something internally or externally? Should we leverage the help of the experts? And here I really believe that it's easier to leverage the expertise, because as we even described very roughly in this last 20 minutes, it's not only a huge scope, but there are really many actually corridors and many stumbling blocks.
Exactly.
Really small things that are completely changing whether you are covered or not, whether your product or service is covered or not. So you need to basically understand this by heart, and in such case, I really believe it's really convenient and important to leverage expertise that actually external expert can help you, how they can help you in this endeavor. And thinking about this, it's really also important to notice that this is not a one-off exercise, but it's something that you need to do on an ongoing basis. So also expert can help you to set up a new modus operandi, a new operating model in which you are taking accessibility basically by design. That from the very beginning you are implementing this. Actually, even regulation requires you to make sure that your employees are trained, and not only about this regulation, but about how to approach accessibility issues. So once again, it can be a huge accelerator to make sure that you're focusing on your customers and business values, and then experts help you actually to make sure that your solution is also feasible from legal and regulatory perspective.
Okay. Yeah, true. Very true. And we'll attach the link for the, let's say, how to guide. You can learn a bit more within the description of this video and the podcast later. Another question that comes straight to my mind is about the different companies in terms of size, in terms of the operating models. What's your experience? How do the challenges of achieving such a compliance differ between those, let's say, small startups, large organizations?
Yeah. So for larger organizations and incumbents, it's really often even hard to map all the touch points that are covered by regulation, because you have, and I'm not joking, 100 different systems that are communicating with your client in many different ways, because you have CRM to coordinate marketing efforts, you have operational systems to coordinate all the claims or other customer complaints, and all of the touch points, regardless of the front-end system, regardless of the back-end system, they need to face the same regulation rules. So even understanding the complexity is really hard. If you are at startup, you don't need to have basically a first phase that you are trying to find all the touch points, all the interactions, because you have a product, one app, one job, or you have a really simple solution, which then you basically are investigating from regulatory perspective. But incumbent players, actually, they need to firstly even map the challenge, what they are facing. And second thing is that when you're implementing this, there is a completely different challenge or stumbling block which we are facing when you're a small company versus a larger company. Because for larger companies, capacity is an issue, but basically they can find resources to make this happen. But planning is quite difficult, because you need to plan many years in advance what you are doing. And here, accessibility is like adding a new level of challenges that you need to keep in mind when you're planning your target architecture landscape, or when you're planning how you are migrating different solutions. For startups, there's a different challenge, because you have unlimited resources, and you don't want to basically to make sure you don't want basically to spend one developer's time on to basically invest a lot of time to make sure that you're compliant with this. So here actually this lack of expertise or lack of resources can be an issue. So from this perspective, once again, leveraging expertise can be a really useful exercise to make sure that you're focusing on what really matters for your business, not about reading 200 pages of the documentation and standards description to investigate whether it's feasible or not.
Yeah. And maybe just one last question I do have for you. I know we're reaching the time, so please be brief with your answer. What are the most common accessibility mistakes or sometimes hot fixes that either could lead to compliance issues or legal risks, or maybe you'll slip through the cracks, but then they'll backfire or give you some kind of false sense of compliance? Do you have some in mind?
Yeah, definitely. So probably the biggest issue, and it's quite straightforward, is omnichannel experience, because you are creating a process which actually it can be fully accessible on mobile because you're leveraging mobile device specific features and APIs, and then you are just putting the same process, the same customer journey into web, and you have an impression that it's accessible, and then it will be completely not accessible if you are not thinking about channels and actually their preferences and the system. So here, ensuring that omni-channel journeys are actually accessible is a huge challenge. So keep in mind always different channels, not only about, don't assume that the journey is accessible because one of the channels is accessible.
I got you. All right, thank you. Very informative episode this time. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us today. And dear audience, if you're still hesitating to join Agile Product Builders community, I believe now is the time. So be part of these conversations and grow with us. And our next episode is coming soon. So stay tuned. Have a great rest of the day and bye. Thank you.